Guys, Dr. Nathan Burrow back again. So we're going to go ahead and jump into types or categories of injuries, however you want to kind of think about it on this video today. This is why I did the healing process in the last one, because literally a lot of this is going to be based off of that sort of stuff. So anyway, make sure to like and subscribe, all that sort of stuff, and definitely make sure to check out that video if you haven't first before watching this, because otherwise it's going to probably get insanely confusing. I'm going to try not to get too hairy or in the weeds on this one, because this one, basically the three types all kind of intertwine together. One can become the other one can become this one. They can all three be occurring. It's very, very confusing with the way they go. And like I've said several times before, medicine is very, very gray. It's not always black and white, cut and dry, all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of gray areas. And this is the reason why. It's because you can have conditions that are all three of these type of things. Okay, so the three types are acute, chronic, and permanent are going to be the three that I'm talking about, right? You have acute conditions, chronic conditions, and you have permanent conditions. Okay, you have different mechanisms that cause all these. You have all sorts of different stuff, right? But what's crazy about this is you can have a chronic condition that turns into acute symptomatology, and all of a sudden, if that goes unchecked too long, it becomes a permanent condition, right? You can have a permanent condition that causes chronic symptoms that can bridge into acute states, you know? So that's why this gets weird, and they very much intertwine. But they're very distinct differences, not only the way you approach them, but a lot of times the causes behind them, okay? So anyway, with that said, let's go ahead and jump into what acute is. So acute, you're talking more of it's more short term is I think the easiest way to state it. Where basically there's a lot of swelling usually involved with an acute state, but there's a lot more symptomatology. It tends to be a lot more of the severe stuff that you're worried about, right? So we're talking like blunt force traumas, big falls, things like that. You ripped a muscle, a lot of stuff that's broke a bone. You know exactly what you did. It's usually very local and precise on where it happened. And you can usually at least dictate right when it happens. You know what I mean? Like, you know where it hurts, what you did, all that sort of fun stuff. Now, does what you did make any sense on what happened? Not always necessarily, right? There's times where it's like legit, like, yeah, I got punched right there, or I took a big fall. And there's other times like, I don't know what happened. I literally stood up and couldn't move, you know? We'll kind of get into why on that here in a second. But anyway, acute is going to be new and bloody. It's going to be very, very focal. Usually the symptomatology is big on it, and the inflammatory state's usually very high in those, okay? So like I talked about in the last video, you need high inflammation in order to lay good collagen. Well, with these, usually these are laying very, very good collagen, and it's because there's good inflammatory states. However, when you're in a good acute state, as you can imagine with, I'm sure everybody's seen like blood loss or anything like that, you don't want too much of it. There's a fine line between therapy and torture, right? I say that a lot with my soft tissue work in here, where I can be therapeutic, but I don't want to bridge into that torturous type chamber, right? It's the same thing when you're talking about swelling, where you can have a finite amount of swelling and cause a very good healing process and good collagen lay, but you get too much of it and you're just causing more harm than good. You're too darn sore, you're ripping up too much tissue, and it's going to get to the point where it's going to cause more injuries, right? So you want to kind of control that swelling in that acute state, but in a sense, let's not get too far into it. Acute is going to be swollen. It's going to be very, very traumatic. It's going to be local. You get my point, right? There's something, you know exactly what happened. It's pound, it's there, you know? Chronic is totally opposite. Chronic is going to be very minute type traumas like this, right? So it's like I have pressure on my finger, okay? And I just keep putting pressure on my finger all the time. And as it gets more fatigued, now my wrist is going to get involved and it's going to start going, right? And then you get to the point where your arm's getting involved. It's repetitive type traumas where it's like it can be work, it can be lifestyle, it can be habits of slouching, it can be whatever it is. It's doing the same things over and over again. It's the definition of insanity. You just keep doing it over and over again without any sort of correction in order to stop you from doing it. And because of that, it compounds on itself to the point where you finally have this entire structure that's been compensated for a while, right? Like that one thing started giving on that joint, right? So once that started getting to the point where it was so fatigued from this pressure I was putting on it, it goes down to this one. And then it gets to the point where that one's so fatigued, it can't take it anymore, so this one's now compensating. right? And then just keep going as it goes. And they build on themselves. They're very, very slow and steady. A lot of times you don't realize they're even happening because they're so slow with the way they compound on themselves. So like I was saying, it tends to be lifestyle and stuff that does it. With these states, because they're so micro and not big like car wreck traumas, they tend to have very low inflammatory states. They lay poor collagen. And because of that, that breeds to where it gets more widespread and more to the point where it's just massive. And what sucks with these, and that's why they're the hardest thing to treat, is these chronic type conditions, is because they're very, very widespread. They've been happening for a long period of time, and it is very insanely hard to pinpoint one or two certain things that are causing it, because it's been such a long time, slow drip process that it's hard to revert back, okay? So that's why they're so hard to treat. Okay, we'll kind of talk about the treatment here in a second on that stuff, but that's the big thing with chronic. They slowly came about. You don't even realize it. You just sneak up one day and you're like, gosh, I'm so tight. Or, man, my hip has been aching horribly for like 2 years and I just don't know why. You know, so it's stuff like that. It's very long in the process. Let's go ahead and talk about the third one. The third one's going to be permanent. Okay, permanent's a little bit of a different one, where you have acute, you have chronic. They tend to go back and forth between each other. But what happens a lot of times, it's usually if things are unchecked. Sometimes it can be an acute leads to a permanent immediately. So yeah, permanent means it ain't going back. I feel like that's kind of obvious, right? So by definition, it's more of a metastatic change in the body. And what that means is basically the body has changed the foundation that it's made of. You know what I mean? Like it's burned wood, it's turned it to ash. There is no way you're going back to wood. Okay, so when you're talking about a metastatic change, there's times where it's you're born with it. There's times where it's developed because that chronic condition we were talking about went so widespread we didn't watch it and it's turned into a permanent condition. And there's times where you had an acute issue and maybe that went unchecked, or maybe just the acute issue in genu has now led to a permanent issue. You know what I mean? So let's kind of give an example of all three. So a permanent that you're just born with, you're usually talking about something genetic, right? So like type 1 diabetes. It's an insulin, you have to take insulin your whole life type thing, right? You just aren't producing insulin, okay? That's a genetic issue. Okay, you're born with that. There was nothing you did to cause it. You were just born with it, right? There's some neurological issues that are kind of in the same boat, like Parkinson's, ALS, things like that. Now, MS, you know, where not necessarily anything you did in your life that led to it, necessarily, at least known right now, but they occurred and they have now caused a permanent condition, okay? But things like acute issues that can lead to it. Gunshot wounds is a very good reason. Car wrecks, right? You can have a car wreck, sever your spinal cord, and obviously you've caused a permanent condition because you become a quadriplegic or paraplegic, you know? That's a very gruesome example, but an arm got cut off. That's obviously a permanent condition, but that was an acute process, you know? Chronic ones, let's go to that. They're a lot less gruesome. Arthritis is probably the best example when you're talking about a chronic condition that can lead to a permanent, where if you have a joint that has been unchecked with that chronic fatigue, like I was talking about, like you're just compiling, putting all that pressure on it like this, sooner or later the body is going to be like, hey, you're not doing anything to fix this. It's going to break down that joint and basically start trying to solidify it in order to give it stability because you're not doing anything about it. You know what I mean? Then it builds up osteoarthritis or degenerative joint disease or whatever you want to call it. It's arthritis. It's wear and tear arthritis. And it gets to the point where basically it's laid down this formation around it and it's become to the point where you can't really revert it back. All you can really do is try to get as much motion into it as you can. It went unchecked too long. The chronic condition led to it. Anyway, but that's what the permanent stuff is. It's not things that you can change, but there's ways to maintain and treat them at least, okay? So we'll get into that in a minute. All right, so let's talk about treatments or at least approaches on a lot of these, okay? So when you're talking about an acute state, the reason acute will become chronic, because I bridged into that in permanent, I didn't do the rest, so let's do that first actually. So if you have an acute state where you have a major issue, say, like I was saying, the hamstring pull or something like that, right? You pull your hamstring, you don't do anything about it. What's gonna happen is now you're limping on that leg really bad for a while, right? Well, you're compensating somewhere else. So because of that, you're now going to breed a chronic condition where not only is that not going to heal right, but now you're fatiguing other things around it, which means that you're going to build a chronic state in the musculature and the joints and everything else in the system that's surrounding it, okay? Another fun one that you could think of is say something, the endocrine issues are big on this one, where you can have major endocrine issues, and this goes both ways. Chronic endocrine issues can lead to very acute type symptomatology and hormonal basis, and vice versa, right? Where acute can lead to that. But that's not my realm. We won't get into that too much. But there's a lot of cases where you can have an acute issue, it goes unchecked, and it's going to lead to a chronic problem, okay? Now, chronic, same general concept. So we were talking about the arthritis stuff, but talk about all that wear and tear, right? So like I've said, when you have a low inflammatory state, you end up laying poor collagen. Well, you can imagine if you're duct taping a system together with widespread poor collagen and just poor tissue, well, you're now at a spot where, like I said earlier, you had that acute issue where I don't know what happened, I stood up. Well, if you've been fatiguing out your low back forever, right, just due to daily life, whether it be work, whether it be our habits, our posture, holding and playing with the kids, whatever it is, you've got all that fatigue back there that's been building up for years upon years, right? Well, finally you do something like stand up, put your pants on, tied your shoes, anything. I got out of bed. I've heard all sorts of, I picked a cookie up. I literally reached to grab my coffee. There's been a laundry list of them I hear, and it's a lot of what we hear as far as the acute stuff goes, even where it's not really explainable on why that action would cause it. The reason that action caused it is because you have such a chronic condition from all the fatigue you've put on yourself that your duct tape is compromised, and it's going to cause an acute trauma because you are unstable, right? So the way that we treat those is the acute, I can go ahead and approach, maintain that swelling, and just try to control it like we were saying in that healing process video, right? And in those cases, it's more of I'm trying to calm the swelling down because there might be too much of it. And in doing that, I just need to make sure we go slow, get it calmed down, get that tissue stretched out, make sure everything's moving okay then, and then we can go ahead and just make sure that we're maintaining it. So in those cases, they tend to, in ways, rebound faster, kind of, but at the same time go a lot slower because you tend to be in a lot more pain, okay? But you can control the swelling by lowering it, right? That's when we're gonna do a lot of ice and stuff like that, but also that's the approach, is more just trying to calm it down. Chronic, and then it gets to the point you just need to maintain it, like healing process video, you watch that, you get my point. Anyway, chronic is totally different. If you come in with a chronic condition where it's just like, I'm really stiff, I don't know what's happening, I can't move my arm, like at all, right? I have frozen shoulder, I can't figure out what's going on. Well, you got to get everything opened up. But in order to fix that, like I was saying, you've now had a widespread poor collagen laid formation, and I need that strong collagen and that inflammation in order to get good healing. So the way you approach things like that is I have to, instead of dropping the inflammation, introduce inflammation into the area so that we can break down that tissue and start a little bit of a controlled acute reaction in order to get you to the point where you now have good collagen growth and we've healed everything. The problem with acute is I'm going to induce soreness and induce inflammation because I have to have it to get you to heal. The hard part is those chronic conditions are so widespread at times where I can press somebody's calf and you feel it in your neck because of all the soft tissue that has been laid due to compensation over the years, right? They take a while to get through and they jump all over the place because there's so many compounded issues on top of it, right? So you start acute reactions in order to fix these chronic conditions because that's the best way to lay the collagen to get the healing process going. While in the acute process, I need to control the inflammation and just calm it down and make sure it's maintained while you continue to heal, right? Both of them come into the office, but they're treated a little bit differently. But in a nutshell, we're trying to basically get to the same Zen type, hey, this is the amount of swelling I want. Let's just make sure we get that function back in, find that middle line and get it controlled, okay? Now, permanence, different spot, okay? If you've hit that permanent spot, there's obviously no way I can get you back to the spot where I can get that natural healing. But there's still approaches you can take, okay? And the big thing with it, because I've got a lot of examples of people with neurological issues and of course arthritis that come in here, that there's no way I'm going to cure that issue. However, if I can get motion in there, I can make it to where the muscles are strong enough around the arthritis everything's functioning around it to where it's not as big of an issue for it to kind of pop open that rusty joint. You know what I mean? It moves better because the tissue's stronger and more functioning. That rust is going to make it to where it's putting more stress on everything around it. But if I can stay ahead of that fatigue and that stress and get it to the point where you're still moving good, then you're still going to, the weather's still going to affect the arthritis. But if the muscles and everything are all functioning and strengthened around it, then obviously it's able to move a lot better. And it can affect quality of life tremendously. Or we might not reverse it, but we can at least keep you moving. Now, have we seen some crazy stuff where stuff like, what's it called? Bone spurs have like reabsorbed slightly? Have we seen arthritis halfway over? Yeah, it's happened. Is it likely? No. Is there a way that I can truly explain that? Slightly, not really, and there's no way that I'm going to claim that I'm doing that, because that's not. If you want to say anything, that's more of an act of God type thing. But if I get the function back in there, I can keep you moving. I can keep the quality of life up, and I can make it to where you can do a lot more without that permanent condition holding you back, okay? We're getting everything strong around it. Now, other examples other than arthritis, when we're talking about things like I was saying on the neurological, and this will be quick, when you're talking about things like MS, right? That's a big one we see. MS or Parkinson's or something like that. Obviously, there is not a darn thing that I am going to be able to do to fix that. Now, is there nutritional stuff that might aid it? Possibly, yes. Is that me fixing it? No. It's, again, I might be helping the sentimentology to an extent, but I'm also not going to bridge into that realm because that's outside my scope. I'm not even going to try to attempt that. But the thing I can do for patients like that is, you can imagine how with stuff like that, like I've got one buddy that because of his MS, it's very strange. You can move your foot, but you can't like when you're standing up, you can push off on your toe, but he can't push against you. It's so strange. Like, there's weird things that just aren't really explainable, where you can do something one way, but you can't another. It's weird. It's like wires are crossed, right? Well, with stroke victims are another example. I've got a buddy, he had a stroke, I can't remember how many years ago it was now, but because of that, he's got one hip that literally just doesn't fire right. And because of that, he has to overcompensate and has a chronic condition because his other hip is basically doing all of his work. He's got a permanent limp. Now, one thing I can do for him is I can make sure that I open up both of those hips, get him moving well, and in doing so, kind of like with that arthritis, we can aid the things that permanent condition is going to be causing on the body, because we can keep everything around it opened up, okay? So I think that's the easiest way to kind of explain that. We can stay ahead of it, affect quality of life. There's no way I'm going to fix, obviously, the damage that is done in those states. It's metastatic. I can't reverse that. I don't have a time machine, and I can't snap a finger and get it to go, you know what I mean? So anyway, in a nutshell, that is the 3 types of conditions. That is the 3 types of injuries. There's 3, whatever you want to call it, categories of injuries. You have acute, you have chronic, and you have permanent. And as you can see, because this is another longer video, it's a weird topic where it overlaps. They all tie together. Eventually, they all will become one, and they all can breed into others. But the way that we approach it is basically we're trying to get it to this one set of zen spot where we want the right amount of swelling, we want the right amount of everything to where it's just controlled, okay? But they're all approached in similar ways. It's just we gotta get to that spot. So anyway, I hope that kind of make a little bit more sense. When I get to the specific conditions, we'll obviously be telling you how they're acute, how they're chronic, what's leading to them and stuff like that. So this is more of just an outline so you can understand later. Anyway, hope y'all like it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I will catch y'all next time. Have a blessed day.